All right, so Unit 2 is just two sections, Rise of World Power and World War One. Now, at our last unit, if you think about our last unit, Progressive Era, Gilded Age, you'll see the time periods are pretty much the same. And that's because everything from the last unit was all about domestic issues, right? Stuff inside the United States, right? From Gilded Age, all the problems, Progressive Era, trying to fix the laws, meat inspection acts, things like that. Remember, migration in the U.S. This stuff happens at the same time period, but it's all the foreign issues. So whenever I look at this Unit 1, it's all domestic. Same time period, Unit 2, but all the foreign issues. So you're gonna hear some of the same people like Teddy Roosevelt, the progressive president. Remember national parks, all that stuff, conservation. We're gonna hear him again here on his foreign issues and how he became famous essentially. So we start with Rise of World Power. And this is America's first, the biggest change in America's policy in the past 120 years. Essentially, before this war, America was just like any other country, just like Canada, Mexico, any other country, just another country. But after this, things changed. After this war, and this class we call it the Spanish-American War, America becomes world power. That's like the biggest takeaway from this. Like later on in our notes, we actually highlight it because it's a point in it. The Spanish-American War changes everything. If you, in your college textbook, they often call this the War of 1898. They don't call it the Spanish-American War. Now, can you guess who this is fought between? America and guess who? Spain, right? The reason why college textbooks don't like to use that term is because not one battle is fought in Spain or in America. It's fought in Spanish colonies. So there's a lot of other people involved in it. So when we call it Spanish-American War, the high school textbooks were okay with it. College textbooks were like, that's not really accurate. But we always call it Spanish-American War just because that's what Star refers to it. So we're always gonna call it Spanish-American War. Now, how does this whole war get started? Well, Spain, remember how Spain was like, last semester, 1301, we talked about how Spain was like the empire. Remember they control like this whole half of the world, like all of Latin America. You speak, everybody speaks Spanish, right? Because of Spain. It's fell apart over time. At this point in history, around 1898, 1900s, Spain is nothing but pretty much like that old boxer that should retire. They'll put up a fight, but they lose, and they know they're gonna lose. They're outdated, they're old, nothing they're doing is right. They're just barely hanging on. That's Spain. America is a rising young superstar that is pretty much destined for greatness. With our Industrial Revolution, where we just went through, everything else that America is doing, we're rising as a star. Spain's falling apart. So the mixed match it's pretty bad. Like this war doesn't even last a year, just to put it in perspective for you guys. But how does it start? Where Spain has the last of its colonies. It has Cuba as a colony, it has Puerto Rico, it has Guam, and it has the Philippines. Those are the four we're actually focused on for this class, for start at least. Now Cuba is a small island. Do you guys actually know how close Cuba is to Florida? It's 90 miles. So when people have escaped Cuba before, they can hop on a raft and they just take the current and make it to Florida. And most of the time they actually make it. That's how close it really is. So Cuba's really, really close to Florida, really close to United States, so it's close to our interests. Well, Spain is actually doing some pretty bad stuff to Cubans. Cubans are fighting for their own independence. They don't want to be, just like history in general tells us this, nobody wants to be colonized, right? Nobody wants to be controlled. Our history, all history shows that. Spain is trying to control Cuba. Cuba does try to fight back. Spain reacts with repression to a lot of people. They will actually have camps with fences. They'll lock people up. Thousands actually starve. Thousands actually starve. It's pretty brutal what the Spanish are doing to the Cuban people. And America picks up on this. Now in America, some stories get exaggerated, okay? And what ends up happening is, it's a pretty not surprising issue. Newspapers in New York are publishing and they want you to buy the newspaper. Okay, if I have a newspaper that talks about the crimes, but it doesn't go into detail, it's not extravagant, but Carlos, his newspaper, tells you all these stories about rape, torture, the kids are starving, which one are you gonna read about? Like, you're gonna go about his, right? So there's a couple big newspapers and they're starting to compete back and forth. They want followers, they want people to read what they write. And so essentially what they're doing is trying to get everybody, all people, I'm recording.
You stop if you want to, I'm clicking on that.
Both newspapers competing to get people to buy their newspapers, essentially. And so by doing that, they start exaggerating it. Nowadays, we call that fake news, right? So a couple years ago, I started teaching it as fake news. Back then, they called it yellow journalism. So whatever you need to do, I always just write fake news next to yellow journalism to help you understand that. That becomes a rampant thing. And that goes on for months. That happens for months. It's the underlying issue. What Spain is doing in Cuba is being reported and exaggerated through yellow journalism. So the yellow journalism is an underlying issue. So that box on the right, the very first box, when I'm like, hey, I fill that stuff out, it says, what's the underlying issue? It's yellow journalism. Now that's an underlying issue. Underlying issues are things that take time and build up, okay? But there is immediate issues, immediate causes. The Lomé letter actually happens as well. I don't have this big focus on this in your notes. They never asked about it on Star particularly, but it is one thing that builds up to the Spanish-American War, so you have to know it. Every country that's on good terms with us, every country we're on good terms with, have ambassadors, right? We have embassies, those ambassadors. In America, Spain, the Spanish ambassador is in America. He writes a letter. His name is Delome. He writes a letter to the Spanish government to let them know how's it going. He says, hey, don't worry about America. They're not going to interfere in Cuba. The President McKinley, that guy's weak. Weak is the word he uses. The Americans aren't going to do anything. That letter gets leaked out. It gets intercepted between the Spanish embassy and the actual Spanish government, and it gets published. How do Americans like it when you call us weak? Do we like that? No, that's one thing we don't like. We're upset. We're furious about it. How does a president feel about that? The president doesn't like that either, right? And so essentially the president decides, President McKinley says, okay, I'm going to show some strength. I'm going to put the USS Maine, a battleship, off the coast of Havana. Havana is in, where? Cuba, right? Okay, I just want to make sure you know that. Because Star Test, sometimes they don't say Cuba, they say Havana. Instead of saying the Philippines, sometimes they say Manila. And you're just supposed to know, I don't know why you're supposed to know, but you're supposed to know that Havana's off the coast of Cuba. Okay? So he puts a USS Maine, a battleship, a naval battleship off the coast of Cuba. He says, hey, we're going to protect American interests. We've got a lot of sugar plantations in this area, so we're going to protect those interests. And sure enough, the USS Maine arrives there, and then it suddenly explodes. Who do we blame for this? The Spanish, not the Cubans, right? Remember, the Cubans are the ones we feel bad for, right? We're like, oh, they want liberation, we feel bad for them. We blame the Spanish. You see why this is the first war America fights with another country where we don't actually fight the country in the country. We actually have to go to other areas. So it gets kind of confusing, but you're right. We don't blame Cuba. There are people we're fighting for. We get mad at Spanish. And McKinley has actually already drafted, if you look this up, he actually has a declaration of war. He was ready. He was excited for it. He just wanted an excuse for it. And sure enough, he presents, after USS Maine explodes, he presents the declaration of war, and Congress votes and says, okay, we got war. We go to war. So the next box says the immediate cause. The immediate cause, the so-called spark that starts this war, is a USS Maine. Maine, war with Spain. You gotta remember that. Maine, war with Spain. USS Maine, war. And battleships are just named after states sometimes named after people. If there's ever a USS, you know it's a US naval battleship, pretty much. USS Maine explodes off the coast. We blame Spain, declaration of war. We go to war with Spain. Now, and I did that on purpose because sometimes we're going to talk about things, or a couple things. Even when we talk about the next section, we talk about World War I, we've got underlying causes, but then we have the spark, right? And this happens all the time in history. We have underlying causes that build up, and then we have the spark. You have to understand, if somebody says immediate cause, that's something that happens just like that, right? Also do this. The next unit section, we have to talk about ships, a couple of ships exploding that are important to know, and students often get it mixed up. So I always say USS Maine, war with Spain. And then on the next chapter, we talk about Lusitania, war with World War I. So I do want to make sure USS Maine, war with Spain, you have to understand that. These pictures here will show you, these are what's happening, pictures that went to newspapers, how they're executing Cuban rebels who just want freedom, independence. We're starving the little children in Cuba. Literally one senator on the floor at one point said, we need to go down and help our little brown brothers, how he refers to Cuba. His words, not mine. This is actually the destruction of Maine. If you're wondering who was really at fault for the destruction of Maine, years later, they pull Maine up and they take a look at it, and the explosion actually happened outward. Like they see the hull is destroyed outward, and they're pretty sure what happened, and the hull was at the ammunitions department. So they're pretty sure somebody just threw a lit cigarette or something like that, and the ammunitions exploded outward. There was no way it actually was hit. They assumed that it was one of the sea mines. You guys ever seen those before? They put them in the water on a chain, and they bump it, it explodes. They assume that's what Spain did. They put a whole bunch of those in the coast, on the coast to catch the ship. But nonetheless, it doesn't matter at the time because we don't know that. McKinley declares war on immediately declares war on Spain and gets it from Congress. Okay, so take a look at this question. I want you guys to try to do this. Let's see if I can zoom in. Oh, look, it works today. All right, so what I did after talking with you, I think it was your period last time about the questions. I was like, hey, there's a ton of STAR questions. So from the first 8 years, I'm going to use those for examples. And the last few years, I'll use those on a test. Okay, so this is actually a STAR question. See if you guys can figure it out. I didn't give a whole bunch of details on this, but I think you guys can figure it out. And when you're ready, just show me your new cards. This is a longer one, it's tougher. I didn't say this one word for word either. The answer is D. Help establish the United States as an imperial power similar to European powers, nations, war power. Now, I didn't tell you directly on that. I want to see if you guys can get it. It'll make much more sense halfway down. You can see our notes. I didn't say war power. Halfway down, we even define the word imperialism because of this. Now, as far as including territorial acquisition settlements and agreements, not necessarily like settlements like we buy it or we settle that area, we take it. It is a tough question, but I think you guys will see once we get far down our notes, it'll make a lot more sense. And actually, every period, I have a handful of students that didn't get it because it wasn't word for word. I do want to look at the political cartoons at this point. You can tell that we start to see propaganda at this time in U.S. history. There's always been propaganda, right? Where you write stories. Well, we're going to start seeing it in huge numbers now. So I like to look at them. Star Test does use some of these war posters and other things as well. But look at this propaganda. Who's this guy supposed to represent? What country? Spain, right? So you can tell that from the belt right there. Is he a nice guy? Does he look happy? And no, right? He looks like a brute, like a savage. This becomes very common with other cultures in general, especially with Japanese and Asia in general. When we go to war next 6th century, we always show them as brute savages. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, if you go to war with somebody, you know you're going to fight and kill people, right? Do you want the best way to not justify it, but human emotions, if I have to kill another person, that's actually really hard to do. And think about all the killing you're going to do, it's actually pretty complex. But when you think of this as the person you're killing, makes it a little bit easier. Like if you think of them as brutes and savages and don't think of them as actual humans. So that's psychological stuff. But there's also other things. Well, who did it? This brute, he's got blood on his knife. Who is it that he just killed? Main settlers murdered by Spain. Then you got their bodies in the background. And what to make it worse, what is he stepping on? The U.S. flag. You can't do that in America. You can't step on our flags, right? So that's some propaganda from the time. This is pretty interesting. It helps remind you the Spanish-American War involves more than just 2 countries. Clearly, who's the bad, evil, sneaky guy? Spain, right? He has Spain right here. He's wearing black. He's going back. The hero is the U.S., right? And the damsel in distress we're saving? Cuba, right? So that's a pretty straightforward one. Then this is easy propaganda, but we're going to start seeing this now for the first time. And it goes through World War II. And even now, you can argue we have memes. Like somebody's arguing, and other people are like, hey, don't you think they have a meme department? And I was like, one day they might, to help influence wars. It would make sense, right? Now, you're thinking, okay, Mr. Brown, we got a problem. We got to save Cuba. Let's get down to Cuba and save Cuba. Let's fight there. That's actually not the first battle. It actually does not take place in Cuba. It actually takes place in another Spanish colony, because we declared a war on Spain, we're going to attack them wherever we can. That's the way war works. And the first place we actually attack them is in the Philippines. Now that's pretty far away from America, right? That's way over here by Asia, okay? So then how do we get there so fast? We're the Assistant Secretary to the Navy. The second highest up in Navy is a guy named Teddy Roosevelt. Remember him? We talked about him as president. This is before he's president. This is the stuff that makes him famous. He knew this war was going to happen. He was worried about it. He said, hey, if we do this, we have to be able to attack Philippines. A month prior to this, Teddy Roosevelt moved a lot of the U.S. Navy from the Pacific Ocean, moved them over to Hong Kong, using the British base. The British has had control of Hong Kong all the way up to 1998. They finally gave it up in 1998. But back then they just had a base there. Teddy Roosevelt has an agreement with the British. We're going to rent part of the base, keep some U.S. ships right there. And so the minute we get this declaration of war, the Navy sends a signal and they attack the Philippines. If you look at these dates, first attack, May 1st. They destroyed the Spanish fleet. By August 13th, over one summer, just one summer, the Philippines surrenders. Just like that, a couple months, Spanish surrenders in the Philippines. Part of that are the Filipino people. If you talk to Filipino people, they're very proud people. They did not like the Spanish controlling them, just like any other normal human person does not like being colonized. They had been rebelling against the Spanish, so when the Americans come in with the Navy bombard and invade, the Filipino people help the Americans and they celebrate. Americans are here to give us our independence, right? Now, that's, boom, that happens just like that. President McKinley, you know what his reaction is? Somebody give me a damn map. Where are the Philippines? Had no clue where they were at, but he just knew we got the Philippines. Now later on, Congress will decide something. You have to decide something. Should we annex the Philippines or should we give them independence? Now, what do they end up doing? We annex them. They become a U.S. territory. But not now. Because World War II happens. And this is what's so important about this. We'll get into this in a little bit, but it becomes a massive debate. Are we going to annex the Philippines or do we give them independence? There's two views on this, right? Imperialist and anti-imperialist, okay? Now here's a big thing about this. We're gonna get to the imperialist thing in a second. Just know that we captured the Philippines and we have to decide what to do with it. On your notes, there's a really poorly printed map. But if you look at that map, I want you guys to circle the two areas we're fighting. The Philippines and around Cuba. Now here's my map here, but if you guys notice, your map's a little different, right? United States is on that side. It's really hard to see it, I know. Do your best. But on your map, US is on this side and Asia is on the other side, right? And I'm just doing that because I worry on STAR, they might ask you, hey, where do these battles take place? And you have to click on a map. It's called Hotspot, and they can do that. They avoid the maps. They usually give timelines or something like that, but I want you guys to be able to know that. You don't have to be exact, you don't have to be perfect, but if you can find Florida, right below it's Cuba, you can circle that, the Caribbean area. And the Philippines, right below China and Japan, if you drew a triangle, the bottom part of that triangle would be the Philippines. This actually up area called Devil's Triangle. You guys ever heard of it? It's like the Bermuda Triangle, but over there. Weird stuff. History Channel used to be really cool before they had ice road truckers and stuff like that. It used to be really cool. Back in the day. I'm going to come back to the whole thing about the territories and imperialism and stuff like that. For this map, it doesn't even have to be perfect. I just need you guys to understand we're fighting two different areas. Because we're not fighting Spain and Spain, we're fighting in the colonies. That's the biggest takeaway from this. Okay? Now I told you about Teddy Roosevelt. He was ready for this battle. He was ready for this war to take place. After Philippines, after he gives the go-ahead to take the Philippines, he quits. He's a second highest in the U.S. Navy, and he quits. He says, hey, I don't want to sit behind a desk. I want to go fight. And so he goes to the U.S. Army, and the U.S. Army agrees, hey, we'll give you put you in charge of a company, but you got to get some volunteers. Okay, and Teddy Roosevelt says, okay, I'll do just that. Now this one I got to take a break and tell you Teddy Roosevelt's story. All the way back when he was a little kid, he used to get sick all the time. Sick all the time. And his dad eventually had enough, took him outside and said, stay here until it gets dark. Next day, same thing, throw him outside, come back in when it gets dark. If you get thrown outside and stuck in the outdoors as a kid, eventually you learn to like it and love it, right? So eventually you figure it out, right? Remember I talked about conservation, national parks, how that's Teddy? This is why. At a young age, he's thrown out there, he has to learn how to deal with it and tough it up, and he becomes this tough guy. People love Teddy Roosevelt. He ends up, he's well off. I don't know if you guys know this, but the Roosevelt name traces all the way back to New York before it was New York. Remember when we called it New Dutch? Remember that one time in 1301 we talked about that? Roosevelts were there first. That's how long Roosevelt's have been in America. Well-known name. He's well off. He gets a good education. He's a tough guy. He goes to Harvard, as a matter of fact. He knows a lot of Ivy League school people. He works his way up. He's in the not a U.S. House of Representatives, the New York State House of Representatives. Remember those laws about referendum, recall, initiative? Remember those laws? He was one of those guys that got that done. He was a progressive guy. But then tragedy strikes. His wife gives birth, and she dies giving childbirth. I had to finish that sentence, right? I was like, all right, let me finish. His wife dies giving childbirth. 4 hours later, same house, but upstairs, his mother dies. So stricken by grief, Teddy Roosevelt gives his daughter to his sister and says, raise this child. I can't be here. I can't be in this house. I can't be here. And he packs up, he quits the New York State House of Representatives, and he goes off to the frontier to try to make it as a rancher. I think like in Montana or one of those frontier states, right? Now, if you're in Montana, and you're a rancher already out there, you see this guy coming from New York, do you think he's gonna make it? No, you have very little respect for him. You don't think he's gonna make it. Teddy Roosevelt has a background though, and he's very successful. He trades with Native Americans, he trades with outlaws, he gets to know other ranchers. People love him on the frontier. They like this guy, he's a hard worker, and he made it. Eventually, he will come back to the East, resume the role of the father, and he goes through the Navy, and he works his way up, and that's where we're at now. So you know his background, right? Tough guy, works hard, people love him, right? So when he needs a volunteer force, guess who volunteers to go with him? Everybody. Ivy League school, people from Ivy League school, these guys want to make a name for themselves to become politicians, they join him. He knows them. Taylor's kind of known for helping college football get started. He knows a lot of tough guys in Ivy League school, so he gets volunteers from there. He gets cowboys, ranchers, Native Americans he's traded with, even outlaws who are trying to get away from the state that they're wanted in will meet up with Teddy Roosevelt in San Antonio. And they'll have organized what he calls the Rough Riders. And they'll come to Florida. Okay? If you go to San Antonio right now, you guys know the Riverwalk in San Antonio? Heard of it? There's an old hotel called the Menger Hotel. That's where he met up. If you go to the Menger Hotel right now, they pretty much preserved everything. It's very similar to what it was when he was there. Even in the main lobby, they have all these Rough Rider uniforms, guns, all the stuff, some historical things, almost like a mini museum, because it's well known that's what Teddy Roosevelt met in San Antonio. Guys, they travel to Florida together. From Florida, they hop on a boat and they go to Cuba. They get so many people that don't have room for horses. Half the guys have to leave horses behind. And when they arrive in Cuba, they are almost immediately ambushed. It's called San Juan Hill, ambush, but Teddy Roosevelt was able to turn it around and beat the Spanish. Now, to be honest, the Spanish are weak. Their weapons are outdated, their uniforms are outdated. The man fighting really don't have anything to fight for. They don't feel it. Americans are way different. Americans, they've got this, every century, every generation has this feeling to fight, to prove themselves, and Americans are doing just that, to prove that they're a nation. And we'll get to nationalism in a second. But on San Juan Hill in Cuba, he does really well. He points out that I couldn't have done this if it wasn't for the Buffalo soldiers in a nearby hill who pulled Spanish away from us. So he gives credit to the whole U.S. Army. He's not just us, but he represents the success in Cuba is pretty short. And then from Cuba, American forces, not necessarily Teddy Roosevelt, but other American forces, will go to Puerto Rico and capture that as well. Puerto Rico is a short story. We don't get too much into it. Puerto Ricans are kind of like, meh, whatever. Not everybody was happy, but not everybody was sad. If you go to Puerto Rico, I took some students to Puerto Rico one time, and we were at the fort. There's the oldest fort there. It's a Spanish fort, and it got attacked during this war. It always gets attacked. And they called this, in Puerto Rico, they turned to our students and said, this was the invasion of the Americans. And the students were like, well, we don't invade people. What we do, we just don't call it that, right? We liberate them. So for Puerto Ricans, if you go there, they teach it differently. But for the most part, they don't rebel, they don't fight back. And even now, Puerto Ricans are proud to be American. It is different. So now you're like, okay, Mr. Brown, well, Puerto Rico is a territory, right? But Cuba is not. See, we make an agreement with Spain. Okay, we get these, this is less than like 3 months. This war does not last long at all. Cuba falters. Cuba's gonna give up, not Cuba, Spain's gonna falter. They'll give up Cuba. They'll give up Puerto Rico. They lost the Philippines, and they also surrendered Guam. You guys ever heard of Guam? If you have, you're a military base, that's it. When you talk about World War II, it becomes a big deal if you watch a lot of movies. Guam's really important in World War II. For us, not so much, but for Star Trek, you have to know those are the 4 areas. Now in Cuba particularly, we're gonna give Cuba independence. But we make an agreement with them. And it's pretty technical. We agree that we're going to have a Navy base in Cuba called Guantanamo Bay. Have you guys heard of Guantanamo Bay? Okay, it was in the news last week, actually. It came back in the news. People were furious. Okay, to relate to modern times, since 1898, we get Guantanamo Bay. We have it ever since 1898. Cuba becomes communist, we still have Guantanamo Bay. Cuba has revolutions, we still have Guantanamo Bay. No Cuba leader messes with Guantanamo Bay. It's a naval base, it's a U.S. naval base, it's part of the agreement. No matter what, no matter how close we've come to war with Cuba, like we have literally tried to assassinate their leader before. They became communists. They had Russian nukes there at one point. We were freaked out. We get all that in the Cold War. We always keep Guantanamo Bay. That's an agreement that's always been there. They're there in Guantanamo Bay. Essentially, fast forward 100 years to 2001, we have war on terror. You guys weren't alive in 2001, right? What year? 2007? 8. Okay. So in 2001, we have 9/11. George Bush declares war on terror. In Afghanistan, Iraq, everywhere he declares war on terror. The problem is some of these people are captured alive. Bush's administration and the Pentagon, they try to figure out what do we do with these potential terrorists that we've caught overseas. And they decide if we put a prison up in Afghanistan, what's going to happen to that prison? People are going to do what? Rebel, attack it, free them. You can't do that. You bring those people over to America on American soil, they have rights. Like you have to put them on trial. You can't just lock them up and interrogate them and wait for them to give up, can you? So Bush administration and Pentagon decide, where can we put these people? This is 2001. Oh, guess where we can't put them that's not American soil, that's far away from the Middle East? Guantanamo Bay. So from 2001 to about 2008, pretty much Bush's presidency, they're going to bring prisoners from the Middle East to Guantanamo Bay. Tens and thousands of these guys arrive, and eventually we get pictures like this that are leaked out. Okay? These aren't even the bad ones. The school has actually like blurred out some of them, but they would do things like sleep deprivation, and they said that's not technically torture. We keep you up for weeks, put loud music on you, and you can't hear anything, all you hear is loud music, you can't sleep. So like that's not really torture, we can do that. Then we start to find out other things. The US Army is there, and they leak out, our Navy's there, and they actually leak out pictures. Soldiers were like strip the guys naked, and then make them pile on each other with hoods on, and then laugh about and take pictures. When they wanted the Korans, there's scripture to read, they would urinate on them, and then give it to them. They would do things like, we have pictures, and the government says they weren't actually electrocuted. We have pictures of them holding 2 wires, a hood on, standing on a box in a puddle of water. And so all these pictures are leaked out. And then we find out, and the US confirms that they do this, is they practice what's called waterboarding, one of the worst torturing techniques. So have you guys heard of waterboarding?
Yes.
Okay. So you watch movies, you see this. It came out, nobody really talked about it until 2001. After this, it became like a world phenomenon. Essentially what you do is you lay down, to actually typically tilt it a little bit. They put a wet rag on your face, and then they pour water on that wet rag, right? And so it gives the feeling that you're drowning, okay? And then they start asking questions, and then don't answer, don't tell them what you want, they pour more water on. It's torture. The whole world agrees it's torture, but Americans say we have to do it. We have to foil terrorist plots, plans. After 9/11, the whole world was with us. Russia and China supported us, guys. That's how the whole world was with us after 9/11. But when this comes out, so many of our allies back off, and they're like, hey, what you're doing is too far, it's wrong, that's torture, you can't do that to other people. When Obama won in 2008, he had a campaign promise to shut down Guantanamo Bay. Never did it. It's one thing people have always blamed him, like, you failed to do that. His reaction was like, it's an act of Congress, I can't actually just close it down. But campaign promise I can't do. But Guantanamo Bay still exists to this day. What ended up happening in 2008 after Bush's presidency is over, the Supreme Court rules and says, hey, those people have rights, even if they're not on American soil, and naval base it's the same thing as American soil, they have rights, you gotta put them on trial. And so the government has slowly started putting people on trial. Some of these guys, they find out they have nothing to do with terrorism. They were just in the wrong place, wrong time. Another person that they thought was terrorist was with them, and they were eating, and they hooded both of them and took them out. They've released people back to, I think Iraq. One guy went back to Iraq, and after 20 years of torturing him, they say he's just too messed up, he's not a threat anymore. Okay? This is 2001, and 2024, right now, they still have prisoners there. The US Army says we don't do any of that stuff anymore, we don't do any torturing, but we still have prisoners there right now. So the big things like what is in the news again last week, what did the current presidential administration promise? That he was going to use Guantanamo Bay and send 30,000 immigrants there. And people were up in arms because, like, hey, historically speaking, this place has been used for one thing, right? You call it what it is, a concentration camp, right? A prison in Guantanamo Bay, essentially. So it came up in the news last week. Some students have heard about it. If you're in politics, you heard it was a speech Trump gave last week, and that's why a lot of people are stirred up about this. Now, for us, for this test, all you know is we get Guantanamo Bay from Cuba. When we get to the Cold War, we'll talk about Cuba and Guantanamo Bay again. And then when we get to 2001, we'll talk about Guantanamo Bay a third time, okay? And of course, Trump's presidency won't be on the STAR test, so we don't have to talk about that. And whatever happens, we'll see. But to give you a background, that's what's going on in the news today. If you heard Guantanamo Bay, that's why people are so furious about it. It seems like he backtracked, he hadn't said anything else about it, but as far as we know, it's still in his playbook. Now, so again, I reiterate, we do get Cuba, we give them their independence. We get Puerto Rico, we make them a U.S. territory. We get Guam, we make them a territory, and the Philippines, we have to decide on what to do with. And I'll talk more about that in a second. And so I have these 4 particularly underlined for a reason. Cuba, Puerto Rico, Philippines, and Guam, we get from the Spanish-American War. And now that we have this, U.S. is now a what?
World power.
World power. Underline that, circle that phrase. That is a takeaway from this whole thing. This whole war, the whole big deal about this war is it changes America into a world power. Now we're in competition with France, British. Germany is actually just getting colonies at this time. But yeah, we're in competition with the world. We're a world power. And this was the idea that everybody had back then. You had to have colonies. So you look at this cartoon, you see 1898, so you know it's the Spanish-American War. This eagle has wings stretched out, and it says 10,000 miles from tip to tip, right? It's covering Puerto Rico all the way to Manila, which is the Philippines. And these other islands, we talk about Hawaii a little bit, Samoa. And it's like Samoa Island, we actually purchased from Germany. Hawaii, we steal, which we get to that in just a little bit. But this is the beginning of it. So this whole section, we expand as an empire, essentially. So you gotta know this part, these 4 was from the Spanish-American War. So here's a star question, 2014. Okay, and they don't, do you guys recognize like these arrows and stuff? Maybe from biology star tests, pretty common star tests. They've actually gone away from these. Still happens every once in a while with star tests. But you can see that the cause, what's the cause, and then what's the effect, and the in-between is U.S. control of the Philippines, Cuban independence, U.S. control of Puerto Rico, U.S. control of Guam. It says, which sentence provides information needed to complete both the cause and effect portions of this diagram? It's pretty easy. All right, answer is A, right? Now, we haven't taught these other things, but you know the stock market is not going to have anything to do with that. A treaty might make me think, oh, that might have something to do with it. What you cheat about Treaty of Versailles is World War I, not even World War II, so you don't have to worry about that. 1914 is World War I, so this is a Spanish-American War. So that's kind of the takeaway. When you take the STAR test at the end, they'll ask questions about, hey, what era is this in? And they want you to know, oh, this is Spanish-American War, or this is 1898, or near that 1898 time period. Okay, so the Spanish-American War, right? When we talk about what to do with the Philippines, this is when I want to introduce the word imperialism. You guys heard that word before? Might sound familiar, it's hard to find. You should know it from Mr. M's word history class, right? But imperialism is when you control another country. So on your notes, I have a bold, that I want you to make sure you know that. When you control another country, one country controls another one. Plain and simple, that's imperialism. Now back then, it's through military, right? You control them with your military. You're stronger, you bully them, whatever it is, you control them through your military. Modern times, we have a new phrase. We say imperialism exists. We call it economic imperialism. Okay, and we see this. The current administration believes in this. They believe in economic imperialism, and that if we put a tariff on other countries, can we make them do whatever we want? That's what the current administration is working on, right? That's economic imperialism. You're influencing, you're controlling another country, but you're doing it through economics. Back then, it's military force. British imperialism, right? The British had control. Spanish imperialism, we typically call it empire, but it's the same thing, okay? So people that believe in imperialism are imperialists, and that means that they want to annex. Do you guys know what the word annex means? If I annex another country, I'm what? Yeah, I'm making them join me. I'm annexing them, making them a territory, right? So that's the word annex. So if you don't know what annex is, you can circle it. I just add that word in because we see that on the STAR test when we talk about imperialism. When you look at these cartoons, imperialism, who's holding this this hand in poker? United States. If you know anything about poker, do you guys know anything about poker? This is actually a really good hand. It's a straight, ace high straight. It's like top 3, top 4, realistically top 3. The best hand you get is all one suit and straights, and it's just nuts. But so it's a pretty good hand, top 3 hands in poker to win by for sure. This one I like because I could see something like this on a STAR test, and it could ask you what this is, what this represents, is this pro something, what war is this from, all kinds of questions you get from this. But if we take a look at this, is a measuring Uncle Sam for a new suit. Okay, Uncle Sam represents America, obviously, if you didn't know that. And if you read this closely, his original suit is made in California, Louisiana Purchase, Florida, and Texas, states that already exist. But he's getting measured for a new one. Okay, who's doing the measuring? Which president? The guy in charge of Spanish-American War, right? And then what is a new suit going to be made out of? The new what? New conquered territories. We call them colonies or territories. The test will always say territories. We don't like to call them colonies because that sounds like we're bad. But the territories are new areas. Now that's going to be new suits. So somebody says this is imperialism, right? You can be like, this is imperialism. Is this from Spanish-American War? Absolutely, because we have Puerto Rico and Philippines in there, right? You can argue that's America's rise as a world power. Okay. Now, what we do with this, imperialists are going to vote on this in Congress, and then see what should we do with the Philippines, and that's the big thing that they have to decide is what to do with the Philippines. All right. So here's a star question, a little tough, not the hardest one, but not the easiest one. Zoom in a little bit. I'm gonna read the top to you guys. His 128th birthday, quote, gee, but this is an awful stretch. The eagle is stretched out. Right here it has the Philippines. Right here it has Puerto Rico and Panama. We haven't got to Panama Canal, but we will. He stretched over all that stuff, and it says, gee, but this is an awful stretch. And the question to ask now, what message about imperialism does this political cartoon convey? So this artist has an idea he's trying to get across, right? Imperialism has problems, okay? A, the closer an acquired territory was, the more self-government it should be allowed to exercise. B, imperialism was not likely to improve access to overseas markets. C, it was not worth angering European powers to annex the new territories. D, the farther imperialist expansion extended, the harder it would be for the U.S. to maintain control. Good. Yeah, exactly. I said right. Clearly, when we say it's a stretch, I can't get. Hey, these other answers are really good answers. Like they're not flat out wrong. They're easy tricked by. You can argue some of these, and you can talk about them later on. The overseas markets is what we're going to talk about later. But yes, this cartoon particularly is trying to point out the flaws of imperialism that some people still believe to this very day. Now, you've got reasons why we want why we want to expand, why we want colonies, why we want territories, and you have to understand these reasons. When you look at the teaks, they're pretty vague. I don't know if you guys have seen these teaks. If you actually look at the top, it says, explain why significant events, policies, and individuals, including Spanish-American War, U.S. expansion, a couple of people moved the U.S. into a position of power. It doesn't really explain what you need to know exactly, right? So that's why, hey, you gotta know what imperialism is. This person's criticizing it, and you have to be able to figure it out. That's like the hardest part. It's like sometimes you just can't teach exactly what you need to know. So I need to understand why we're doing this. One, need for raw materials. What? Do you have an example of raw material, or can you define a raw material? Gold, oil, coal, right? You think, hey, what's it? Iron, like any mineral, right? Any mineral technically is a raw material, right? If you control a territory, you don't pay for that raw material. The British loved and held on to India forever because of free India cotton, of all things, and the location as well, right? In Congo, you guys ever heard of Congo? And the history of Congo is horrible. The Belgium wanted the control of the rubber trees. That was huge. If you look into it, the Belgium were like horrible. Like you want to know some of the worst world history, Belgium was like the worst colonizer ever. It's pretty brutal there, right? They do it for years. So raw materials. At this point in time, raw material, the biggest raw material that's making people money, makes the companies money is actually sugar. There's no oil yet. All boats are steam engines still. So the ships are steam engine. Coal is important, but sugar is a money maker for the United States for plantations. You can see why Cuba became important. The Caribbean area was really nice because of sugar plantations, right? Sugar is the raw material at the time. Two, you have strategic reasons. Think of this. Would we have kept the Philippines really fast if there wasn't a base we could launch from so close? Strategic reasons. Also, a big strategic reason is this. If we would go from the U.S. and we want to sell to Asia, huge, like China is known for huge what? Population, right? It's always had a larger population than the rest of the world. It always has had that, right? We want to sell to Asia. We want an international market. Remember we talked about national market with the railroads? Now we need an international market. You can't make it over from the United States straight over to Asia without refueling with coal. You have to stop to refuel, right? You also need to protect America, right? So if I want to stop at like a gas station, think of it as a gas station, halfway to Asia, what islands do you guys think about that's part of the United States now? Halfway, right here. Hawaii. What naval base is in Hawaii today? Man, these juniors, every junior has not known this. This is the first year nobody, y'all never heard of the movie? Pearl Harbor. There you go, thank you, Greg. Pearl Harbor, you guys ever seen the movie? It's a love movie, it's actually really good, it's really long. But Pearl Harbor is in Hawaii for a reason. We want a naval base that close out. We want to refuel our ships. Eventually we'll get Midway, we'll get Wake, we get Guam with the Spanish-American War. If you want to go over to Asia, you got plenty of places to stop on the way, don't you? To refuel your ships. If you have a Navy, you can have naval bases here, ready to attack anywhere. You can have them all the way over here. So strategic reasons are really important when it comes to why you want to expand, why a country has to expand to become a world power. Nationalism, straightforward. Extreme pride in what? Your country, your nation, right? So that's kind of straightforward. Nationalism with extreme pride to the point where you're ready to prove it. You're ready to kill other people. You're ready to conquer. Couple decades later, after this, well, actually like 15 years later, World War I breaks out. I don't know what you guys remember from World History World War I, but like Germany and Britain, everybody was happy. They were so happy to go to war. Like, yeah, Germany, yeah, waving flags. Everybody was excited to show how great their country was. Nationalism affected America just the same at the same time. You gotta expand. You're not a real country if you don't control other people, right? 4 attitudes towards other people. There's a general idea back then that other cultures, now we agree cultures are different, right? Cultures are just different. They're not wrong. Back then, everybody said other cultures were wrong, bad, uncivilized, right? I just write wrong, so you understand that. In the box, wrong. Back then, they looked at other people. They looked at Philippines, and they're like, oh, you poor Filipino people. You don't have Christianity. And they could argue, we have Christianity. We're Catholics. Spain's Catholic. Did Americans like Catholics at the time? They're like, yeah, it's not real Christianity. You can't do that. Oh, Puerto Rican people, same thing. Oh, the poor Cubans. Oh, the poor people in Guam with their native language and religions. We got to save them. The idea back then that other cultures were just wrong. Just wrong. Now, a big part of all this comes from one man that really summarizes one book was Alfred T. Mahon. You got to know him. He's even on your triangle. He writes this book. And the book's name is not as important as what he talks about in the book. This book is so important. It has such an influence. Teddy Roosevelt reads it when he's president. And pretty much his foreign policy is based on this guy's book. Pretty much just one book. Alfred Mahon studied history. He was an admiral in the Navy. He's okay, we want to be a world power. He goes, he's going to tell us how to be a world power. So your blank says is world power. To become a world power, you need 3 things. There's one, you got to have a powerful Navy. You say, look at the British. Look at the Spanish Armada. If you want to be a world power, we have to have a Navy. 2, if you got a Navy and you're coal-based, you need to have Navy bases all over. So you can attack, or you can refill your ships with more coal, resupply with more food. And he says you need bases all over. The 3rd thing he says is unique to America. There's no other countries had to deal with this, but we're different. We have one coastline in the Pacific Ocean, we have another coastline in the Atlantic Ocean, right? And we want to get ships to one side to fight and help the other side, we have to go all the way down South America. He goes, what we need is a what in the middle? A canal. You guys know that as the Panama Canal. It will be built because of this guy's book. So know these 3 things. Underline Navy, underline bases, underline canal. There's been quite a few questions about Mahon's book, and you always have to know Navy, bases, canal. Navy, base, canal. And this is how you become a war power. Teddy Roosevelt reads this. He's the reason we have the Panama Canal. Teddy Roosevelt reads it. He's the one that builds up the Navy. We'll talk more about that in the second half of this section. But Mahon's really important to U.S. history. Now you're thinking, okay, Mr. Brown, all these imperialists, and you kind of think, oh, everybody's imperialist at the time. That's not true. There's a lot of people who were anti-imperialists, which means they're against imperialism. There's some that are foreign from other countries. This one's actually from Latin America. I think it's actually from Brazil, because it's not Spanish, Portuguese. So it doesn't translate well. But your front picture you see is Uncle Sam. Is he a nice guy? That's a creepy zombie, right? He does have hands, he has almost claws, and he's grabbing up islands, right? It's always cool to see propaganda about your country from another country. It puts things in perspective. That's why you all should study abroad. This is an interesting one too as well. If you look at this one, If you look at this one, we have Uncle Sam representing America. We have this fat guy. That's going to be British. They're each carrying a group of people. Britain's carrying India, Hong Kong, some other areas that they've conquered. British are carrying them. The United States had these new places they've conquered: Cuba, Hawaii, Puerto Rico. And the United States is carrying them over ignorance, vice, barbarianism, oppression, superstition, brutality, slavery, cannibalism. Then it repeats itself quite a bit. All covering over all these rocks to the very top to get to what? Civilization. This idea that these people aren't civilized and it's our responsibility to make them civilized. Anti-imperialists are laughing about this. This is a very sarcastic cartoon. What's it called at the bottom? The white man's burden? This becomes a study in world history later on. People start looking at this today. Europeans and Americans always feel that they have to go to other cultures and save other cultures. They're not Christian, we have to say. The biggest thing probably is Christianity and mission trips, stuff like that. There's the idea that they can't save themselves. We have to save them. Despite the hypocrisy in saying, hey, you guys have slavery, and it's like, or barbarianism. It's like, we did too, right? So this is clearly an anti-imperialist cartoon. I'm trying to make sure I show you guys this because we're supposed to teach you guys about imperialism, but they always want you to see both sides. Like I'm always like, hey, there's two sides to union, right? There's two sides to monopolies. There's two sides to imperialism as well. And there were quite a few people that are anti-imperialist. Andrew Carnegie, of all people, was anti-imperialist. There are quite a few imperialists and anti-imperialists. Here's probably my favorite cartoon. This might be my favorite cartoon in U.S. history because it points out some hypocrisies to the extreme. If you look real quick, it's definitely classroom. And it says U.S. First Lessons in Self-Government. And this is the new class: Philippines, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and Cuba. Now at the bottom, it says school begins. And Uncle Sam says this to the children. He says, now children, you've got to learn these lessons whether you want to or not. But just take a look at the class ahead of you. And remember that in a little while, you will feel as glad to be here as they. So the class ahead of them was California, Texas, Alaska, Arizona, New Mexico, the newly added states. Right? And so those are the class ahead of them. Do they look civilized according to their to standards back then? They're civilized. Do they look civilized according to their standards? No, we got to teach them to be this way. They have to learn to be this way. If you look at a chalkboard to summarize this, it argues, hey, England once had control of its 13 colonies, and it was for the better of the 13 colonies until they were ready to be on their own. Over here it says Confederate government refused to consent to be governed, but luckily for us, the Union forced the government on them, and we're all better for it. But what's crazy about this is like it's pointing out, okay, you're saying that, but it's pointing out a few flaws with American history that's going on at the time. First, we talk about this. This guy represents whom? Books upside down. He's kind of got his feathers on his head. Native Americans, right? Are they with everybody else, or are they off on their own on reservations? Okay. What about this guy saying he's not even allowed to come in? What country does this guy represent? He's not even allowed to come in. What's the immigration law at the time? Chinese Exclusion Act, right, of 1882. You're not even allowed to come into the building. And then it points out some internal domestic issues we haven't talked about, but you know that's going on. This kid right here, okay, he's descendants of whom? They're not allowed to get a public education at all. Slaves, right? African Americans in America are just clearly not allowed. So this cartoon kind of points out the hypocrisy of, oh, you're going to teach people, but you're denying it to everybody else, just what's convenient for you. Okay? They want these territories overseas. Because if you have a territory near the Philippines, take a look. If we have Philippines control Philippines, now we are close to China, and now we can sell to China. We have the overseas market. We have an international market. That's the whole point of becoming this world power. So again, I got all the things listed. We talked about it already. You don't have to highlight them again. Philippines becomes a territory by one vote. 51 to 49, the Senate votes make it a territory. Now you're thinking, okay, well, what's the big deal? If I fast forward almost 41 years, Japan is conquering this side of the world. It's World War II. Japan has literally went into China, which is an ally, and surrounded the Philippines. They control all this around the Philippines, just not Guam and not Philippines. They control all this. They're actually about to go to Australia. We look at Japan and say, hey, you guys are too close to the Philippines. Back off China, they're an ally at the time. Back off, or we're going to stop selling oil to you. So we quit selling oil to Japan. It's an embargo, right? We're talking about this again, World War II, right? because we're concerned about Philippines, our territory. Only became a territory for one vote, but this is 40 years later, it's still our territory, right? We tell them back off the Philippines. You're too close to it. We're cutting off oil to you. Japan decides, all right, United States is now a threat. United States was the #1 oil selling country at the time. So Japan now realizes something. The United States will go to war with Japan. And Japan realizes we got to hit them first, we got to hit them hard. So where does Japan attack in World War II? Pearl Harbor. And so they attack Pearl Harbor, destroy it, wipe it out. We're upset, we're fierce, 3,000 Americans die. We declare war in Japan. And then Hitler says, hey, Japan's my ally. I declare war on you. And we're brought into World War II. So what I'm saying is 1898, that one Senate vote, one vote to make Philippines a territory, 40 years later actually puts us in World War II. We're going to talk about later on when we get to World War II. We did not want to go to World War II. We did not care about Europe. We did not want to get involved. Hitler declared war on us. We didn't declare war on him until after he declared war on us. We avoided the whole thing for years. They fought from 38 to 41, and we refused to get involved because we were like, no more wars. We don't care about it. But once Japan attacks us, we got to go to war, right? And then that also puts us in war Europe, all because 51 to 49 vote to make Philippines a territory. So the long-term things are sometimes you just can't predict that, right? But it's amazing to us. All right, so let's take a look at this picture. It always happens at one point in the lecture. It doesn't work anymore. Okay, but maybe it's just slow. Okay, stay with me. We're almost done here. We're gonna finish early. Take a look at this question from 2017. I can kind of zoom in a little bit. I need to move it up for you. I think that's all I can do. 2017, right? Which number of territory did the United States gain by winning the Spanish-American War? 1, Puerto Rico. 2, Virgin Islands. 3, American Samoa. 4, Wake Island. Now, you looked at that map, you saw we have all these territories, but where do we get, which one do we get in the Spanish-American War? A, Puerto Rico, right? Okay. See how dumb and easy that question was? But I try to make that clear. They want you to know Spanish-American War got us those territories specifically. Because we also will go on and get Hawaii, but not from the Spanish-American War. We're done with the Spanish-American War, close that book, it's done. Now we're talking about other areas that we got at the same time. Because we're trying to become an empire, got to expand. We get Hawaii. How we get Hawaii is important for you to understand to answer this next star question. Hawaii has been an independent kingdom, but they work with American businesses. Sugar plantation, fruit plantations, really big in Hawaii. The king of Hawaii, he passed away, the queen's left. She's gonna let American businesses stay there. They have to pay taxes, stuff like that. But one American businessman, Sanford B. Dole, has enough. He decides to commit some local Marines to help him and some of his workers overthrow the queen. They lock up the queen, they overthrow the natives in Hawaii, and Sanford B. Dole sent a message to Washington, D.C., says, I'm ready for Hawaii to be annexed into the United States. President Cleveland at the time says, no, that's wrong. 1, you can't control Marines. 2, that's wrong in general, we're not annexing. But Dole says, okay, fine, I guess I'm president of independent Hawaii, I'm just gonna stay here. Next president comes along, a guy named McKinley. What does McKinley like? What does he want? He wants Hawaii. He likes expansion. He believes in expansion. Spanish-American War, he's excited about. He got all this land, expanded America. McKinley says, oh, I'll annex Hawaii. And Hawaii becomes essentially a state eventually. And guess who's the first governor of Hawaii? Sanford B. Dole. Okay? So this is the big thing about Hawaii is stolen. Now, you know, a STAR test is going to ask that directly, right? But they are going to hint around at it. Check out this question here. Okay? Well, this first one's actually super easy. This question is actually super easy. During the late 1800s, Sanford B. Dole contributed to the expansion of the U.S. by advocating the annexation of blank. So easy, right? So straightforward, no tricks at all. It's Hawaii, right? Now that's the easy version of that T, right? You gotta know Sanford B. Dole. The next one doesn't even say his name, right? But you're supposed to know Sanford B. Dole, right? If you look in the Hawaii's expansion of Hawaii, how do we get Hawaii? Okay, so I'll read it to you guys because it's horrible. Like this is like, nobody talks like this anymore. But this is a petition from 1897. So I remember I said you don't have to know dates, but it would help. If you saw this at the end of the year for STAR, you'd be like, oh, that's the Spanish-American War time, right? It would help, but you don't have to know it. Okay, to His Excellency William McKinley, President and the Senate of the United States, we, the undersigned native Hawaiian citizens, who are members of the Hawaiian Patriotic League of the Hawaiian Islands, and others who are in sympathy with the said league, earnestly protest against the addition of the said Hawaiian Islands to the said United States of America in any shape or form. What are they upset about? America doing what? Annexing Hawaii, right? That's what, obviously, short term, that's what you mean. You read that, that's what you're supposed to get from it, right? Okay, so what were these Hawaiian citizens protesting? A, the forced annexation of islands as a U.S. territory after the overthrow of the monarchy. B, the classification of islands as a protectorate after the Hawaiian government signed a treaty with the U.S. C, the granting of a U.S. statehood to the islands after they were purchased from the Hawaiian monarch. D, the colonization of the islands by political refugees from the U.S. A, right? Okay, so that's with the way I explained Dole. I had to tell you how he did it, so you knew it wasn't purchased. You knew it wasn't a treaty. They never say they stole it, but you had to know that, right? Okay, so that's actually a pretty tough one. A lot of students get this wrong. A lot of students in Texas, 63% got this one right. Most of these questions, you're looking at 60 to 70% of Texans got them right. The other ones I have later on would have like, I write on this thing, only 37% of students got this right. Those are the ones that we got to worry about, to be honest. Okay, this is where I left off with my other classes, so I'm going to stop here, and we're done. That wasn't too bad, was it?